Our next panelists are brilliant people from overseas. The question we're discussing right now is a pretty easy, pretty simple one. Does tech make us lonely? The answer, however, is not that easy, not that simple, and it always happens to bring different answers depending on who you ask. Let's ask these distinguished experts in their fields. Please welcome Dr. Michelle Drouin. She is a psychology professor at Indiana University, Purdue University in the United States. Welcome. This seat is yours. Oh, this one. Yeah, that's what we were talking about, right? And author of a book that sounds pretty brutal, Out of Touch, How to Survive an Intimacy Famine. The next guest is, and a warm welcome to Dr. Dina Simmons. She is a leading voice on teacher education in the United States. Former assistant director at Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, and most and foremost, she is the founder of Liberated, a collective at the intersection of racial justice, social emotional learning, and healing. And we are glad to welcome Elliot Manoia here as well on our panel. He is a digital psychologist, a lecturer at the University of Economics and Business at the Danube University in Krems and the University of Applied Sciences in St. Pölten. But most and foremost, he's the founder of Brand Karma, a company that uses emotional intelligence to foster our experiences and performances. I hope I got that right. Yeah. Welcome to all of you. Michelle,
Thank you.
Since many of us watched one of your TED Talks, you know, millions of people did. You were one of them, was beginning with a great anecdote when you were trying to meet a boy, I think it was in high school, and it wouldn't happen that way today. Could you please share your experience with us?
Oh, I did not expect this. Yeah, so this boy I went up to actually at university. It was my second year. He was sitting at a table full of boys, and I just said, "Hi, I'm Michelle, what's your name?" And during the TED Talk, I really talked about how much culture has changed. Kids don't have to approach each other anymore. They don't learn how to be courageous in their interpersonal relationships because so much of online life is permeating our culture. And it is the way that youth navigate their social relationships. So it worked out for me. The boy who I walked up to and said, "Hi, I'm Michelle," ended up to be my husband. We're still married. It's been about 30 years that we're together. However, I realized raising now two teenagers just how different life is, how much different their romantic world is, because they say now in the United States that sexting is the new first base. So they are navigating even their sexual relationships. Their very first forays into being a sexual being are doing, you know, things online with people who they're just meeting.
So you said it's different today. Is it better or worse?
So let me just say, about 17% of people worldwide are online dating. So I know a lot of them are having experiences that I never had. I cannot speak to this from a personal experience, but I will tell you that dating fatigue or dating app fatigue is becoming a thing. It's something now that research scientists are studying and saying people are tired of dating. People don't trust the people that they're meeting online. 77% of online daters say that people misrepresent themselves in online forums. They feel frustrated with the applications. They feel like it's this merry-go-round that they can't get off. So my personal feeling is it didn't take a lot for me to find a mate and then keep my mate. I always say, this is one of the anecdotes I also talk about in my TED Talk, if someone wanted to steal my mate, and mate competition is a thing, you are constantly surrounded by relationship alternatives. And in order to stay in your relationship, in order to have satisfaction and commitment in that relationship, you have to devalue your potential alternatives. Well, that was a lot easier in the 1990s when any alternative would have to call his house phone or show up at his door. Now, in order for a relationship alternative to express interest, all they have to do is slip slip into their DMs, start following them on social media. You only need a couple of bits of information to find someone. I know your name, I could find you, I could start following you, and then build a connection. And what can begin as a really innocent connection with someone can develop into something that's far more dangerous to an existing relationship. So online relationships, they tend to be harder to stay together and initially get together. I mean, you have the choice of millions of people online, so it's also harder to, I think, find value in your relationships.
But isn't the success of platforms like Tinder an example for, or prove the opposite, that tech does not make us lonely?
Absolutely not. I think the research has shown that tech is making us lonely. What Tinder does, it offers a gamified experience of finding love. We're addicted to the dopamine. We're addicted to the tiny hits that we get when we swipe and we get a match. But in terms of finding long-term companionship, in terms of finding someone who can give you the oxytocin that you need, I mean, you're getting tiny hits of dopamine. They activate this reward pathway in your brain. And that reward pathway is super reinforcing. It's like you're at a slot machine and it keeps giving you tiny wins. But what you're missing out on in Tinder or any of these dating applications are the big wins. And the big wins are actually to connect with a person in a way that's meaningful. I'm going to bring sex into this really quickly because I know it's a controversial topic sometimes, but I have to just break the ice. So there's been a lot of research on the idea that millennials are having less sex than the generation before them, than the Gen Xers and the baby boomers. And people are like, how is this happening in a Tinder generation where you can actually find partners with just a swipe? I mean, before I had to like walk down to the next village. How is it that now these people who are millennials, who are born in the 80s and the 90s, are having less sex? And the reason why I think they're having less sex is these relationships are not getting as serious. If you want to know the stats, one of the UCLA studies, they studied all of California. California adults in this social survey done by UCLA. And what they found is from 2011 to 2021, the number of people from 18 to 30 who have had no sexual partners went up from 22% in 2011 to up to 38% in 2021. So we had a 16% increase in the number of individuals who had no sex partners. And why is that important? Sex is good for your body. It helps with your immune system. It helps with your heart. It helps with bonding with other people. For 2 days after you have sex with a partner, you have an increase in oxytocin that helps you bond with them, that helps you feel that bond of love. So why I think people are having less sex is because they're not getting to relationships that are deep enough for letting them form that kind of sexual bond. So there are all kinds of reasons why Tinder is not leading to increased connection.
I'm glad that it took us like 4 minutes
to
until
reach sex. Yeah,
right?
I mean, it didn't take long.
Let's get back into the perspective on school campuses from teachers as well as students. Gina, does tech make young people lonely?
Well, I mean, I really, is this on? You hear me? Hello? Yes, you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Well, first of all, it's what a transition from sex to school. Oh, goodness. All right, so I would say one, I think, is tech making us lonely? I think there's a lot of research that's saying that correlates technology and social media to loneliness, but I think all of those studies need to have more nuance to the studies, because what we're seeing from the loneliness aspect is that young people are finding community online, right? So maybe they may not consider themselves lonely. They may be lonely in the real world. And so what we see is a lack of connection in the real world. But those people have families and they're at home. So my question is what is the role of the family in ensuring that connections are made at the dinner table, ensuring that we're not giving screens to our young people to babysit them? So it's like, how are we using and misusing as adults in young people's lives, and how are we relying on social media and technology and AI to connect to people when we have people right in front of us? So what is our behavior, and how are we impacting the loneliness based on, so we can't really blame it on technology. I think that's what the cop-out is. I think we need to blame it on our behavior patterns and how we are leaning on technology instead of really pushing young people to go up to the boy in college and say, hey, you want to go on a date? We've actually made it very difficult. They haven't had enough practice in doing that. And so when we think about even how we educate our young people, we're like, oh, let's get a smart board, right? Let's keep putting technology into education. Teachers still are going to teach the way we've always taught. We're still going to use the technology like a chalkboard, right? But then we throw apps and we throw iPads at young people and we say, here, this is generative. This is going to know how much you know. It's going to assess you. But we don't do the extra work of saying, now here's how to understand what you're doing. Here's how to understand your connection to what you're doing and how you apply that in the real world. So I'll start there because I can go on that. But I don't think we should blame technology. I think we have to look and be more self-aware about how we're using technology and how we are exasperating the disconnection. Because loneliness is a mental health crisis. We've always talked about it, particularly with old people, but now that we're finding that the numbers have increased, tremendously with young people, now we're like focusing on it. But I think we can't blame tech. We have to look at our behavior.
Maybe we can turn on the volume a bit here on stage so that we understand each other a bit better, just for our technicians. There were studies in Europe that during the pandemic, many students were feeling less lonely thanks to technology, thanks to WhatsApp, Snapchat and whatever, so that they didn't have to stop their interactions fully. Doesn't that contradict?
I don't think it contradicts what I said, but I think the research, it would contradict the research, the research and the social media and the socialized image of technology. But I think it's important to understand what technology is for. Technology makes our lives easier, right? So technology was a wheel. A wheel was technology. It made life easier. So when the pandemic hit, people were able to connect. Like, for example, any of you attended conferences or Zooms, like conferences on Zoom or talks on Zoom? What technology did, it made information accessible. And I say accessible, one, because anyone could go online and find information, but particularly during the pandemic, there were conferences that were online, there were talks online, there were people who do not have the physical capacity to get to a place could now access information and conferences and people online. And personally, I was diagnosed with a chronic illness in 2021. And it was actually connecting online with people with a similar illness and finding community online. So again, it's how you use a thing. And so I think what we tend to worry about tech, but we have to really do the self and social awareness as we think about emotional intelligence of how we can shift how we rely and how we behave as it relates to technology. So we have to, again, do the work for ourselves. I think young people were right. They were able to continue their schooling. They were able to connect with people online. However, there is mixed research on that because what we're finding now in education is that young people did miss out on social interactions. They did miss out on those opportunities of, when you're at a conference and you can walk from one place to the next, those kind of in-between conversations and the learning that happens with the in-person. So the message is mixed, but I would say, again, we have to stop making technology the cop-out and start looking at ourselves and how we rely on our phones and we're always on it. When you sit at the dinner table and you walk and you sit in a public transportation, how often do you look at people and they're like this? Right, they're like this. And you're like, I walk into any room I walk into, I say hello, and people have to go, And so again, it's our behavior. We cannot blame it on technology. The phone doesn't do anything to us. We do stuff to the phone. So again, it's human interaction with technology. It's our responsibility to shift how we use it.
It's us humans. Elliot, you bring in the European perspective. Is there a difference between the United States or And Europe or other parts of the world?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you. I'm very honored to be here with Michelle and Dina. Huge honor. And Florian, thank you very much. I would look at it more at a global stage in terms of, and historically. So technology has always been helpful first, or usually is helpful first. And then there is, like, oh, fire, that's great. But then how many people burnt themselves? And then we had to adapt and create policies. And I resonate very much with what you say. I think with the larger dating pool that we have now through apps like Tinder provides more choice. And then we have the, what's it called, choice fatigue, or and then also more smart boards in the classrooms doesn't change the systemic way of teaching. And there's so many things that technology has improved for us. We take escalators up, and then we go to the gym to walk on stairs. And then we used to, have food scarcity, and now we have full fridges, so we have to artificially create diets, interval fasting, which we talked about. So we used to fight for food, now we fight with food. Again, technology helping us in that sense. And same with phones and social media and algorithms. They're helpful in a way for us to connect with family members in Australia, real time, or even now, Zoom calls or virtual reality calls or live streaming. But we have to learn to deal with it, and I think individualization in society and urbanization, so going from the village to cities, is more of a factor than technology. In the village, you had to know everyone. You had to depend on each other. You had to work together. So I think urbanization and individualism are much more of a factor than technology, which I agree is more of a tool. And we have to, teach our children how do you use the screen, or at dinner time, no screen time, look in the eyes when you're having a conversation. So social skills, emotional intelligence, critical thinking, especially with deep fakes and democracy. And also what you said, I think is an amazing point. In a village, if you had a subculture, you might be the only one in the village. Now, if you are in a subculture, if it's a medical reason or another reason, or a sexual flavor, worldwide, you can find easily 100,000 or 1 million people. So in that sense, also technology, again, can be helpful. So I think technology can be both. Help us make us lonely if we're introverted, or with our children, or our social skills, but it can also help us bring people together. In elderly homes, there's loneliness we know is more dangerous than smoking. So for elderly people in homes, it might be, especially for an upside down demographics and aging population, like Japan. So I think technology can be both. And we as a human have to retrain and learn to, just like we go to the gym to walk because we're sitting at the desk the whole time, maybe we have to do brain training, maybe we have to do social training, critical thinking training. So that would be the difference from historical perspective rather than a geographic difference.
Gina, Elliot was speaking about urbanization. This is, I think, globally one of the big factors in changing societies. Can you compare between villages and cities as well?
So my mother is from Antigua. Its sister island is Barbuda, so it's often known as Antigua and Barbuda in the Caribbean. Very much village-like, so I understand living in a village, and I live in New York City. So I'm able to experience both the village and the city. It's as full, you could live, and I don't know if you all can relate with Vienna, you could live in a building and not know your neighbors in a city. I have lived in buildings with so many people, and I have no idea who lives next to me. Because there's no need to know the people who live next to me. I can go down, I can go to the store, I can get everything I need in a city. In the village where my mom grew up, first of all, the island is only 108 square miles. Even when I'm in New York, people know who I am because that's how small the island is. But our village is even smaller. So you know, there's a saying that says the village raises the children. That is still very true. I was walking down the street in Antigua, in our village, and I was, an older lady stopped me and she said, she gave me sex advice. She was like, don't get married yet. Don't let those men ruin your life. And like, she didn't know me, but she knew me enough that I was from the village and she should care about me. And so I think when we think about urbanization, what we've done is we've taken humanity out of living. We've decided that we value efficiency, we value how much money you can make. The reason why they build up is so that they can make more money. We have dense cities, and we have oftentimes, you know, you could be in a building full of people, in a room full of people, and feel very lonely, and no one has to look out for you. No one has to look out for you. And actually, the way I choose my neighbors and my neighborhood is like whether we actually have a neighborhood. And that's why I still live in the same area for 20 years, because I know my neighbors. And that's why I refuse to leave where I live, because I get to have the village feel. And I think what urbanization has done, we have to connect it to globalization. And I think of 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And at the end, the alcalde, the village combusts. And I think it's a critique of urbanization and colonialism. And we're so focused on moving fast that we forgot how to be together. And so I think villages, you still have the family, we look out for each other, and in the city, you don't have to do that. There's no need to, as you were saying.
Michelle, I also want to talk for a second about a generation that we often forget when we talk about technology, seniors. Any different expertise or experiences, loneliness, and seniors and technology?
Absolutely. They've already touched upon it a little bit. Social isolation is one of the leading causes of mortality. So it's the equivalent of smoking a pack of cigarettes a day to be socially isolated in terms of the effect on on your longevity, which is interesting. It dovetails nicely with what they're talking about on the global stage. The ways to live a longer life, the ways to live a healthier, longer life, is to be surrounded by a variety of individuals. So in terms of social isolation, they don't necessarily talk about the number of people you see from one category. What seems to matter is the diversity of your contacts. So are you seeing friends, and you're also seeing family members, and you're also seeing people who are in a community group with you? That seems to have a real protective factor for elderly individuals, and there are a lot of reasons why. Because they have someone to talk to share their life with, to witness the things that they're going through. And they also show that there's a positive protective factor of friendship in terms of your health behaviors. Because, you know, when I get together with my friends, they may say, do you want to go for a walk? Or they'll offer to take me to one of my healthcare appointments. So certainly the elderly are our most vulnerable population. People over the age of 55 are the most likely to be lonely. And we no longer live in cultures globally, we no longer live in cultures where families take care of their elderly by taking them in. We used to have a lot of filial piety, especially in Eastern cultures, where once your parents or grandparents were old, you would take them in. That is no longer the culture, so much so that elderly individuals in certain cultures are really suffering because they don't have the infrastructure set up to care for elderly people. So they are especially vulnerable. I always say in almost every talk, call your grandma. Call your grandma or call your mom, call someone who, you know, may be lonely. They also don't have a lot of touch. Sometimes you'll touch an elderly person, you'll hug them, and they'll say, this is the first time I've been touched in a week, a month. It is so valuable to have human touch. So yes, they're especially vulnerable. And I do think that as this is about tech, I have been a big proponent of AI as companionship for the elderly. My grandmother, when she died, she was virtually blind. She listened to audiobooks that she got from the library. She didn't have any fancy tech. I think she played them on like a CD player. And she sat every day alone listening to those audiobooks. And I was very happy because she maintained a sharp mind, but she lived in a nursing home for 10 years while her roommates and the people who lived with her died. The average time that a person works in an elderly care center is 1 to 2 years. The average time that someone lives there is 1 to 2 years. So the people around her were always changing. I would have loved for her to have an AI companion who she could have shared her days with, who she could have had a book club with, who she could have talked to and said, this is what's going on in my life. And as these technologies get more intuitive and better, we're just in the infancy stage, they will be able to, I think, fill some significant gaps for the elderly.
In our second half, let's focus a bit more on solutions, on the positive side, on the optimistic side. And let's start on school campuses again, Dina. What can teachers do to prevent students from loneliness?
I mean, I work in the space of social emotional learning, and so one of the things that we do is social emotional learning essentially is a set of life skills that help us get along better. And I say, it's not only about getting along in the classroom, it's about getting along with the world, right? There is a global context, and particularly in the U.S., we're very U.S.-centric, and I would love for our young people to learn about themselves through themselves and to learn about the world. So that's one thing that I think is important in terms of loneliness. I think teachers, one, need to model the behaviors that they wish to see in their young people. So a kind, hello, how are you? All right, and then teaching our young people about how to use technology and what technology is for, how to use AI, how to differentiate fake news from real news, how to know relevant information versus irrelevant information, and also really, again, teaching social emotional learning skills that allows our students to build the relationship and the social skills for humanity that is needed, because at the end of the day, we need to learn how to relate to each other, because we still relate to each other, but we do it online. And I think another way is addressing cyberbullying, is how to be kind to each other so that you know how to be kind to each other online. I think once there's a screen and the screen acts as a mask, sometimes people can be so brutal and so mean to each other. So how to also understand that there is really teach humanity, because I think sometimes our young people are so connected to a screen that they don't think that people have feelings and that people receive those and that people get hurt and they're harmed by what they read online. So also how to build resiliency as you relate to some of the cyberbullying, but also how to prevent and mitigate cyberbullying and other antisocial behaviors to begin with. So teaching social emotional learning, doing it in a way that's culturally responsive, and teaching students about themselves and the world would allow them to really engage in a way where humanity and people are first.
You found it liberating. Can you tell us exactly what you do and how you prevent social emptiness?
So we intersect radical love, healing, and racial and social justice. I mean, we were founded in the pandemic, and in the U.S. context, racism is real. I grew up as a Black woman. I go into a lot of spaces, and people don't think I belong there. So at the core of loneliness, I think is important, is for us to talk about belonging. At the end of the day, people just want to belong to a people. They want to belong to a classroom. They want to belong to a group. And so at our core, we focus on belonging and building community. We do that through programs with adults, with young people. We do an affinity group so that we have Black, Indigenous, and other people of color engage in a group, because right now in the States, they're under attack because of anti-critical race theory, people going to protest about teaching about our full and honest history, teaching about LGBTQ, teaching about, American history, which includes slavery and all those things. They don't want to talk about that. So we try to ensure that happens, but do it where we focus on community, building spaces where healing can happen, because we all have the capacity to heal. And I think we all need some healing, so we also help facilitate that as well. And we do that with programming, we do that with research, and we do that with movement building.
Mention that research that you told me about yesterday.
Okay, all right. So Elliot and I had dinner yesterday, so we are fast friends, and now we're all going to be fast friends. And look at us, loneliness, making connection on stage. I will say is that we did research where we asked Black and Latinx students about what they want to experience belonging. And some of the, I'm just going to say some of the things that they said is they want their teachers, is for what do they want their teachers to do? They want their teachers to model care and community building, to create the conditions for care, which is slightly different. So what are the practices that you're doing in the classroom that create the conditions for care? They also want their teachers to care about and to ask them about their aspirations. They also want to build critical thinking skills through student-centered instruction. So they want to learn through themselves about the world. So again, this is middle school students, and at this age, adolescents, young people are very inner focused and they're dealing with their identity. So those are just some aspects that we learned when we asked people how do they want to feel and how do they want to experience belonging, and how their teachers can help facilitate that. Now, Elliot, we want to hear from you.
Yes, I want to hear. What's the solution, Elliot? Tell us.
Well, I don't know.
No.
But come on, I mean, emotional intelligence is your big topic at Brand Karma. What solutions do you see to prevent us from becoming lonely?
So absolutely education. That's absolutely the foundation. There's a lot of focus on STEM in Austria. In German, we call it MINT. And here, that's okay. That's fine, but we need to complement it with critical thinking, social skills, absolutely. So there needs to be a massive systemic change in the skills that we prepare our next generation for. And then in the companies, the work that we do for companies, it's a bit trickier because not everyone is open to self-reflection and some of the hallmarks and cornerstones of emotional intelligence. So there we look to improve the processes from recruitment to onboarding. Some people start in the company and 3 weeks later they get the laptop or they don't get introduced around. So it's about optimizing processes to make it more human. Of course, diversity, accessibility. Next year we have the Accessibility Act coming, which means all digital services have to be accessible. Super important. Then neurodiversity is also often, how often in the office do you hear, you're so crazy. Yeah, you shouldn't say that, right? So there's a whole bunch of elements where you can normalize also vulnerability, normalize emotional intelligence. When I talk about emotional intelligence, people think, you're bringing in more emotions. And I'm like, well, so, if you have road rage, then you're very emotional. But your emotional intelligence is, not necessarily up there. So the paradoxical thing is, the more emotional intelligence you are, the more composed you can be, the more rational you can actually be. So it's actually about almost making businesses a bit more rational. That helps with innovation, that helps with making changes, because a lot of change management and all of that, especially dealing with new tech, which scares a lot of people. Is AI going to change my job? And working from home and remote working really need to add a lot of critical thinking, emotional intelligence, and to fill in those water cooler moments that you had. Now you have home office, and you have less interaction, and you have to, just like the escalator meant we have to go to a gym to work out, we now in the office have to kind of artificially create more culture because it's not naturally there anymore like it was in the village. So there are lots of processes, steps, education, awareness, and so forth. Processes, yeah.
Michelle, we were talking about car drivers, students, teachers, seniors. What can parents do to prevent their kids from becoming lonely?
I think that they've already covered it. They've said, they really need to, I think Dina said it perfectly, you need to model the behaviors you want. Tech-free dinners, looking at a child, connecting with them, making eye contact. I want to say really quickly, because I know that we have just a few minutes and Dina has to run across the whole building, but I want to say really quickly, because I know a lot of people who are really struggling with feeling lonely. Our search for romantic love is something that often leaves people feeling very disillusioned and very lonely. So if I just have a couple more seconds, I want to say this. It takes only a fifth of the second, according to some research, up to 30 seconds for the brain to register love. They look at your brain and the way it lights up when it takes cocaine, And it's the same areas that are activated when you actually feel love. So saying someone's name, seeing someone's picture, it takes very little time for us to determine if we like someone. They've done research, and people think it takes a lot longer than it actually does to find out that we like something. They say, here, we're going to show you this style of painting. People think it'll take you 16 paintings to figure out if you like the style. It takes you 3. It takes a person on average 173 days to figure out if the person that they're with is the one they want to marry. We as human beings are very good at knowing what we want. So my biggest advice, I think, to those of you who are on a search for romantic love now, or if you ever are, is to make decisions quickly. Eliminate the noise. Find your signal on this earth and eliminate everything that is extra, that is diverting your attention, bringing you down and making you feel like you are on an emotional merry-go-round. Just ditch it. And so a little bit with parents, bringing it back to your question, I think they need to also eliminate those distractions in their children's lives.
How optimistic are you for the future? I mean, the Time magazine reviewed your book, and the president of Time magazine said he, after reading it, he is optimistic. Are you as well?
I'm optimistic because I know that we're just in the infancy stage, and they could attest to this as well. These technologies are being created before we have the chance to study them. So what we're doing now is course correcting from us getting some advanced technologies and now trying to figure out how to make best use of them in our society so that we're using them to our benefit instead of our detriment. So I am confident. I wouldn't be able to be here, do my work, write a single paper if not for the technologies that we have. I'm optimistic, but I think we need some course correction, which is, I think, what you're saying as well. Is it?
Yeah, well, I think we have to understand, too, that who is building what they're building, how they're building it, and what's the data coming from, because we also know that there's bias baked into what's being building. You know, usually we say the tech bros, we don't say tech gals. So it's really like, for me, I think I'm optimistic, but there definitely needs to be check and balances. We also know there's a ton of bias that's built into AI. They're learning the algorithms from what's on the internet, so they're picking up the bias, and their schema is biased, and their data set is biased. So I think the idea of having course corrections and audit boards and check and balances would allow for us to use it in the best way possible. Otherwise, we might abuse it the way it has been abused in some ways. It's facilitated. You know, if we think about what's happening in the Middle East and what's Palestine, people are protesting against Google for its role in using AI for genocide. And so I think that is also important to understand the global context and the ways in which it can be abused, but in the ways that it can also facilitate humanity. And that's why it's created, is to facilitate humanity. I think people have good intentions, but we also have to understand that everything is built can be abused. You can have you have an intention of a baseball bat is used for baseball to hit a ball, but it can also be used to hit a person. So again, it's our humanity and how we're using it, because it can also be abused. And so again, the work is with us.
Thank you very much, Dina. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Elliot. I just want to make sure you all follow these guys on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram and whatever, not to make you lonely, because they will remind you regularly to switch off your phone. Thank you very much. And back to you, Jana.